Much. I'll begin by just a small apology. I'm fairly tentative about some of the ideas that I'll be talking about today. So, in order to cover the degree to which I am tentative, I've actually written what I'm going to say today rather than just ad-libbing. That's the first thing I'd like to say. The other thing is that if there's anybody here who would like to join me in some kind of a group to discuss issues around childhood and children's literature, then I'd be very interested in welcoming you or us getting together to form some kind of a group to carry on with some work in and around socialist ideas, childhood and children's literature. Because at the moment I've failed miserably in finding other people who are interested in it. In fact, it was one of the reasons why I thought maybe of having a meeting like this to find out that there is anybody else out there interested. So I discovered there are several people here. Okay, so the first thing I want to look at is first of all some ideas about children and the nature of childhood that are current at the moment. Then I shall look at the public view of children's literature, and then what Marxism offers this field by way of theory and practice. And I'd like to start with the Daily Mirror in the post-Foot era, I believe. I have to say that because he's sitting over there grinning at me. But so the Daily Mirror, June the 9th this year, to get an idea perhaps of how ideas of children and childhood are handled in the popular press. That's not to say, and I'm not saying when I'm saying that this is equal to or identical to the way in which people actually treat children. It's always important to say this. I'm talking about, if you like, the public construction of childhood as opposed to the nitty-gritty of the way in which people treat children. All right? So I want to see, like, at this single issue, partly chosen at random, but partly because of that headline on the front page. I thought, well, how in one issue is the business of childhood dealt with? So the main headline, as you can see, is Girl Sex Victim 8, No Angel, Says Judge. And opposite this story on the front page is a picture of Virginia Bottomley and the heading, How Many More Kids Will Die, Mrs. Bottomley. So clearly we're in the territory of victimology, the child as victim. And just to remind you, in case you don't remember, the excitement of that front page was about Judge Hill's statement concerning a babysitter who climbed into bed with a girl and, quoting that, seriously assaulted her, and the judge gave him 2 years probation and said, I have information which leads me to think this girl was not entirely an angel herself. Now I think the key word here is angel. When we view children as victims, and this is by and large a repeated theme in the mass media, we are seeing children as essentially innocent. That's the construction. When the judge wants to suggest that children are in some way sexually active, he draws on a popular view that children are innocent. I'm not commenting on the ideology of what he's saying. The press, meanwhile, asserts that this is precisely what the girl is, an innocent. This is paralleled with the Bottomley story, where in order to point out that there are health cuts, children as innocent victims are dying. And inset into the story, there is a picture of a girl from the previous day's Mirror, of Rowena, aged 11, who died of an asthma attack because, says the Mirror, there was no hospital near enough to where she lived. Now, page 2 of this issue sees children mentioned in a significant aside. There we are, just up the top there, under the heading Madness of Tories. Okay. A new Tory MP says the Tory party was full of professional conspirators seeking to destroy, and then he says, playing with matches like smackable children. Now, it seems to me to reveal 2 more aspects of the construction of childhood. That children are wild, uncontrollable and malevolent creatures who need to be brought into line through smacking them. Now, elsewhere in the paper, we meet a 5-year-old girl who witnesses a 19-year-old woman being shot, and then the gunman shooting himself. Quote, as a 5-year-old girl looked on in horror, he shot householder George Norris, 73, blowing a hole in his leg. He then shot Samantha dead before turning the gun on himself. The little girl was later carried screaming from the house. Now you notice that the 5-year-old is female and little, and is totally incidental to the story. She's there as a kind of theatrical contrast. She's the image of total innocence while the adult world blasts itself to death all around her. And notice also that she's passive, she needs to be carried, so active enough to be screaming. On page 6, there's an editorial headed "Suffer Little Children." Those of you with religious education will know that's a quote, and it's usually depicted in Sunday school art. Believe it or not, I did actually go to a Sunday school once, as evidence of Jesus' gentleness and kindness. The children in those depictions are used as evidence that Jesus is gentle and kind because he likes children. And the editorial picks up on the bottom of the story and begins with, "There are some things on which you just cannot put a price. The life of a child comes top of the list." Now, what does this signify? And I'm suggesting that that's another facet of this construction, that we say in public places, in public, what we say about children is that they are the most important thing in life. They're beyond value. And needless to say, we use the word price in capitalist culture in order to say beyond value. We then, as it were, pin that statement to ourselves if we're trying to prove how human or humane we are, as is the mirror. That's what it's trying to do, prove how humane the mirror is in attacking government cuts in the National Health Service. So it uses children as the means to prove how humane they are. Now, below this editorial is a cartoon about Major losing the initiative over Europe. Thatcher is seen surrounded by children. Major is depicted as Woody Allen, and the caption reads, "Woody Major loses custody of the Brit." Now, the cartoon here, I think, obviously is using notions of motherhood rather than childhood, but the children in the picture, which of course is down in the front row can see, but the children are standing or sitting around helpless, arms by their side, looking sad or sullen-faced, watching the departing father. On the next page we have boy killed by 3 teaspoons of salt, parents warned of poison peril, and here it is that it's the weakness of a child's body to withstand what we as adults can tolerate. That seems to be the theme that I would deduce from that story. Over the page, Anne Diamond has a brief story on cot death, and a few pages on the fate of a child is used to highlight the bad conditions of Thompson hotels in Majorca. I'll read you the story. But the biggest danger is posed by the sheer 90-foot drop from the pool and garden to the car park. Stevie's parents, Jim, 42, and Mary, 42, from Liverpool. Isn't there always demand, Paul, that people put the ages of people? It is. Were relaxing by the pool when their son came close to death. The first they knew of it was when they heard people screaming. They found Stevie frozen with terror on the crumbling ledge, which fell away from the car park below. Tears welled in his eyes as onlookers watching from balconies shouted instructions to him. He finally inched his way to safety after his dad coaxed him down in a calm voice. Stevie said, "I had no idea there was any danger. I was bored playing by the pool and I just went to have a look. I didn't know it was going to be that high and dead steep. It was when people started screaming at me that I got frightened." His father said, "He could easily have slipped and been killed. I want other people to be warned so there's not a tragedy." Now, I probably don't need to spell this out, but of course, this is a story that could just as easily have been used in another context in order to tell a tale of childish willfulness, stupidity, or alternatively parental lack of control of children, which of course is another current theme in the popular press. Instead, the danger a child was in, that is, his helplessness and his potential for victim status, is used to highlight something deemed as bad. I mean, we might agree it's bad, but I'm saying that's how it's used. Now, in the Mirror Women's section, there's a tug-of-love story about an adopted child that the biological mother wanted and got back. Again, this is more about motherhood than childhood, but the child, of course, there is essentially a parcel in a kind of pass-the-parcel story. Then across to the next page, yet another facet of the construction, a story about 2 sets of twins marrying each other. Our sweet twins set. Now, the Mirror have dressed the boy children of the 2 marriages alike, okay, and put "spot the difference." Now, I think this is significant for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the story is partly about our ideas of individualism, how ridiculous and amazing that people can be so similar and all that stuff, which also leads into, I think, some implied stuff about sex. You know, how do they know the difference, that sort of thing, you know. And there's a picture of the two women twins. Maybe you didn't think that, but anyway. It's always a problem when you play this construction game that other people don't agree with you, you know? There's a picture of the two women twins pregnant at the same time. So the outcome, the children, are foregrounded in the picture as if to carry all this stuff about individualism and sex. But on top of that we have the vital component of clothes. Children are used here as clothes hangers. Children are the passive carriers of commodities, and indeed almost blur with the commodities and become the commodities themselves. Twins are particularly attractive to this, because twins put ideas of individualism on the agenda, I think, in our unconscious, and the issue of individualism is very much tied up in our minds with consumerism. I am what I buy. Elsewhere in the paper, C&A's have got a half-page advert for children's clothes with two fair, straight-haired children modelling T-shirts and shorts. The children are not only clothes hangers here, they're the right ideal kind of child, white, smiling, and standing still, popping up a classical-looking water fountain or mock Grecian urn. I can't quite sort out what it is there. Do you want to use that? Do you want to use that? So I detect there, with the fact that the children are up against this classical urn, that this is an image of order, cleanliness and control over nature, which is one of the key aspects of 18th century culture that imitates. This seems to me a classic piece of adult wish fulfillment in relation to children, which is order. In fact, as early as 1800, a historian, Hugh Cunningham, who's written a book called Children of the Poor, has noted that archbishops and bishops used to parade children in the streets and then congratulate themselves on how clean and ordered the children were. The two further appearances of children in the mirror of this issue are a brief paragraph on how to find the right nanny for your children, in the mirror, would you believe. Nannying, of course, is a totally class-bound idea and signifies that most unsentimental side of attitudes to children, namely that though they are, to quote the mirror elsewhere, top of the list in things of life, it's also necessary to give them to other people to look after. On the cartoon page, children appear in the perishers. The boy says to the dog, "I find it hard to think of you as a silly little pup," and the dog thinks, "I find it hard to think of you as anything else." So the joke there uses the fact that we often equate children with little animals, frolicking about happily, again, as before, out of control, needing the firm hand of an owner, and like animals, under the sway of instinct. They're here significantly silly, not sensible. So I want to pull some of these views together. We see children here alternately I should say, as innocent, and as wild and uncontrollable, helpless and passive, as commodities, and as agents for a view of the ideal, clean, white, ordered child, but also as silly and needing the firm hand of a master. Now clearly there's plenty of contradiction here, like how can people be both passive and wild and out of control, all in one? How can they be both passive and wild? The issue, I think, and again this is where I'm being quite sensitive, is what function does all this serve? And at this stage, I would argue that primarily all these ways of looking at children are in a sense a means to an end. We use childhood as a way, not we, but this construction of childhood I should say, uses childhood as a way of proving the value of adulthood, or rather a particular view of adulthood. Children are used in essence as variants of ideas of inferiority and inexperience in order to show adults as superior and having benefited from experience. Children then are seen as incomplete human beings on the way to becoming something else, whereas we adults are complete. And perhaps, I'm only suggesting this, perhaps this is part of that lovely old crude bourgeois developmental model of civilization as a whole, seen as progress from barbarism to perfection, with the odd blip or two for wars and genocide. Now, moving on to children's literature in the public eye. In the last year, children's literature has appeared on the public stage just twice. One was concerning the issue of censorship. Is children's literature censored by left-wingers? And two, what should children read in schools? The censorship issue came to the fore because of a report by the PEN Censorship Committee in January this year. They sent a questionnaire to 428 writers of children's books. So after it found out only those writers who belong to the Society of Authors, which as it happens doesn't include me, not the Writers' Guild, or people who are members of neither. 105 replied and 62 said they had experienced some form of censorship. So 62 out of 428. This led the Daily Mail to write, and here's a stat of their double-page issue on it, politically correct thought police now control children's publishing in Britain. This lunatic evil censoring of our children's hearts and minds. And then Faye Weldon had a postscript, you can always trust old Faye to come out on the right side, can't you? Faye Weldon had a postscript headed, deprived of truth and even dreams. Now this representation of children's literature was repeated usually in milder terms, okay, across the whole of the press. Nobody, not even the heavies, questioned those statistics or asked where those original questionnaires went out and to whom. Nobody questioned it. So what's being said here? Children's literature is given some of the qualities that are frequently used to construct the sentimental picture of childhood itself. That it's innocent, free and imaginative. Then along come the thought police, like me, the suddenly all-powerful left. It's funny, isn't it, how we suddenly become all-powerful when it suits them, and other times we're just crapheads in the Stone Age. So suddenly the all-powerful left who inflict dangerous anti-freedom tendencies, turning the literature into humorless and dull, politically correct rubbish. Now, I happen to be, I don't buy the Daily Express, you understand, looking over somebody's shoulder today, and there we have it, the dark ideology that seeks to destroy our books. And there's a geezer there who's described as a self-confessed traditional teacher, Jack Smith, claims he was ordered to sling hundreds of books into a skip after his school has already been claiming to dictionaries, atlases and Bibles, and we know that they all represent the truth. He made the allegations, etc., etc. So there we are, they're still going into it. I haven't read the whole article, I didn't get past that first starting paragraph. Now, almost simultaneous with this PEN report, the government published draft lists of books, probably many of you are very familiar with this, that should be read in schools. Now, it was clear from the first draft that even for children under the age of 11, some of these books would be compulsory reading. And then at some point between the draft and the final publication, this compulsory element was removed from younger children, but retained for the secondary age pupils. And the list is very interesting. Firstly, they came in a document that has no author, merely a publisher, the Department for Education and the Welsh Office. So we're here on the receiving end of a bureaucratic directive. As far as the lists themselves, I should just deal with the ones intended for something called Key Stage 2. The course itself, I think, is an interesting construction of childhood in the sense that it views childhood as coming in key stages. With certain reading activities appropriate for one age and not another. Now the literature, I'm quoting now from the report. The literature in this key stage should be wide-ranging and cover the following categories. Perhaps, possibly a contradiction in terms, isn't it? It should be wide-ranging and cover the following categories, right? I don't know. The authors and texts are illustrative examples covering the whole key stage. 1. A range of modern verse and fiction, verse by writers such as, and yes, I will own up to being guilty, I'm on that little bit. Fiction by writers such as. 2. Some classic poetry. 3. Some long-established children's fiction. 4. Texts drawn from a variety of cultures and traditions. If accepted, and it's supposedly in the interim stage before a new little gang of crooks, a new junta, headed by a guy called Sir Ron Deering of the Post Office, what the government understands by a man of letters, he's got to decide whether this thing is what everybody's got to do. So, if it is accepted, this list would be what inspectors, and probably the new text at 11, will use as the yardstick that teachers, schools and children will be judged by. So let's have a little look at that list. Now first of all, the list has what philosophers call a category shift. Usually very revealing ideologically, I would think. Whereas the first 3 categories on that list concern usual boring lit-crit classifications based on genre and period, the last category is something altogether different. texts drawn from a variety of cultures and traditions. So it's a classic case of the afterthought, isn't it? An interesting example of how ethnocentricity works. There's literature, on the one hand, and there's something called a variety of cultures and traditions. In fact, in a recent panel discussion in front of the Booksellers Association, where I was on a head-to-head with David Pascal, the only name who actually appears on that in that book, one of the authors, so he's one of the authors of this, he actually referred to that last category, the text drawn from a variety of cultures and traditions. He actually used the word other. He didn't actually say, and other cultures. So embedded in the very description of what books should be read is a hierarchy based on Englishness top, others last. I thought it might be distracted. Secondly, it's not bullshit, and after all, something to notice. Now, second thing to notice are the categories 2 and 3, some classic poetry and some long-established children's fiction. Now, no rationale is given as to why old is good, nor, of course, why any one text has been chosen in preference to any other. And on close examination, the list includes some rather strange texts. A fantasy concerning the self-sacrifice and subsequent mutilation of a young woman loved by a group of soldiers. This is The Highwayman by Alfred Norris. Some powerful and witty snobbery in Just William. Now, there may be some Just William addicts here. I can't cope with that, but if I just give you one little glimpse from Just William. Cook. Yes, cook. I mean, not Captain Cook, just cook. And this is in the narrative voice, okay? Not anybody saying this. This is all the authority of the narrator here. Cook was uttering horrible imprecations and hurling lumps of coal at the door. She was Irish and longed to return to the fray. This is presumably unlike Compton, who was was in favour of peace-loving English folks, obviously. And then we've also got in there, the fanatical domesticisation of girls that you can find in Peter Pan and What Katie Did. Don't know whether you're fans of What Katie Did here, but anyway. And then some very heavy racism in Kipling's Jungle Book. I don't know whether you know how the last story in the Jungle Book, Her Majesty's Servant, very appropriate, I think, for the national curriculum, ends like this. The story is the animals turn up for a kind of inspection by the Viceroy of India. The Indian animals turn up for inspection. Then I heard an old, grizzled, long-haired Central Asian chief who had come down with the Emir asking questions of a native officer. Now, said he, in what manner was this wonderful thing, that's the inspection, what was it done? And the officer answered, there was an order and they obeyed. You can see the attraction this must have had for the committee. But are the beasts as wise as the men, said the chief. They obey as the men do. Mule, horse, elephant or bullock, he obeys his driver, and the driver his sergeant, and the sergeant his lieutenant, and the lieutenant his captain, and the captain his major, and the major his colonel, and the colonel his brigadier, commanding 3 regiments, and the brigadier his general, who obeys the viceroy, who is the servant of the empress. Victoria. Thus it is done. Oh, would it were so in Afghanistan, said the chief. For there we obey only our own wills. And for that reason, said the native officer, twirling his moustache, your Emir, whom you do not obey, must come here and take orders from our viceroy. The viceroy is John Patton. So, in class and culture terms on this list here, working class people and non-white Brits appear largely as servants, idiots, devils, or just simply absent. So with these 2 appearances on the public stage, the Penn Report and the new proposals, we see 2 complementary views of children's literature. On the one hand, children's lit is in the hands of evil lefties, and on the other, the government is carefully going about re-establishing all that was fine and good in the past. Needless to say, Penn hasn't commented on the possibility that such lists might well determine what millions of children will have to read, and that itself is blatant censorship. They haven't commented on that at all. And in fact, when I put it to one of the authors, she just looked puzzled. She just didn't actually understand what I meant when I said it. Apart from these 2 eruptions into public space, children's literature in Britain has in recent years hardly put in an appearance. Occasionally, as say, where new editions of Enid Blyton or Beatrix Potter come out, There are jokey articles about Noddy or Peter Rabbit, and occasionally ex-public school boys write articles about Billy Bunter, William and Biggle. But in general, it's regarded as beneath consideration. The immediate cultural reason for this, I think, is to be found in the construction of childhood I've already described. If in Britain we use children in the public sphere in order to buttress ideas of adulthood and maturity, it follows that it becomes hard to talk seriously about a medium which, for all its faults, can and often does take seriously children's desires and thoughts. Now to Marxism. Here we might hope for some insight into how everything I've described so far has a history, and the history can't be looked at purely in terms of ideas. We should instead try to place these cultural practices of children's literature and constructing childhood in relation to actual material circumstances, that is, in relation to how people lived, fed, worked and died. And that relationship should be dialectic, that's to say, the cultural practices can't be reduced to mere consequences of those material circumstances, but that the cultural practices have ways of affecting, to some extent, the nature of those real lives. Then again, in order to understand those real lives, the material conditions, we should have to look at them as being lived in societies governed by a struggle over material resources. A struggle over who owns, who controls the exploitation of the resources, and who owns and controls any production of goods and services deriving from the resources. And how people organise themselves in order to carry out those cultural practices will be part of the whole, that is, they will largely conform to whatever is the prevailing mode of production. And so I take these from Marxist ideas that can help us. And because we're talking here of a system by which a small ruling class owns and controls these resources and production processes, we're also talking here of ways and means of coercion, structures in society whereby the ruling class achieves consent. So it's childhood. Now, according to some Marxist or perhaps quasi-Marxist thinkers, childhood is essentially a bourgeois invention. That's to say, the rise of the middle class in Europe marks a rise in the need to create a separate category of human being called the child. This is particularly visible, they say, in the differing ways in which children are dressed before and after the bourgeois revolution. Before it, children wear small versions of what adults wear, and after it they wear specific children's clothes. This contrast can be repeated across the board with toys, ideas about education, and eventually with the invention of children's books as viable commodities outside of any specific form of instruction. That's how the argument goes. The middle class, they say, domesticised women, demanded of its children certain codes of conduct to enable property to be passed on securely and safely. New wealth was not to be wasted in the aristocratic manner on hunting, overeating and orgies, but should be spent wisely with an eye on the future and delayed gratification. Childhood then becomes a way of expressing these middle-class ideas which grew up as a consequence of and as a way of influencing the activities of buying, selling and small production. One snag with the thesis is that it's fairly clear that most forms of human culture delineate childhood in some form or another. Children are marked out for specific acts of initiation in hunter-gatherer societies. Have a look at Childhood and Society by Erickson. They're used symbolically in medieval societies for ideas of both innocence and evil, born of original sin, and so on. So what's more accurate to say, I think, is that the rise of the middle class saw the development of notions of childhood that correspond more closely to dominant views that we see around us today. And notice also that I keep saying middle class. And in some books, this rather mysteriously turns into all children, as if the children of peasants, artisans, journeymen, and the so-called labouring poor, later become proletariat, simply slotted in behind middle-class practices. Clearly this never was and still isn't the case. In straight material terms, the working-class household could not maintain itself on the earnings of one or even two adult members alone, either through the earning of money or through the unpaid labour of instant care, begging, scavenging and bartering. Children were always part of the means of survival for working-class households. They were always productive, whereas their middle-class counterparts tended to be consumed. Whereas the working-class household used children to survive in the here and now, the middle-class household regarded children as the future, as recipients of accumulated wealth or property. All that artisans and labourers could pass on were work skills and habits. With the rise of the middle class in England, which reinforced its acquisition of wealth, property and commodities with ideas of industriousness, order, propriety and cleanliness, came a whole gamut of ideas about how children needed constant beating, control and constraint. I probably haven't got time to read you John Wake's on that. But simultaneously, when the old aristocratic order started breaking up under pressure from the new bourgeoisie, there was another group of people who posed another view of childhood as natural, innocent and free, Blake and Wordsworth. Neither of these two ideas were new. Quite often in the books you'll find that they are described as new. They can be found in medieval writing, but depending on where and which class is talking and for whom, the emphasis change. Now, children's literature enters the scene in the 18th century. The literary historians note that various forms of literate culture are produced for children before then, but they're nearly all of an instructional schooling variety, or alternatively, one or two European books of manners, in order to school the child in correct ways of behaving in company. And also at this time, in that pre-children's book era, there were lots of popular forms in the form of chapbooks and the like. So what marks out children's literature is precisely that demarcation, delineation of childhood, a commodity viable in a shop, meant for children, and not directly meant as part of a system of schooling or instruction. And the year for this, and there is a year, it is rather odd, but there is actually a year, and it's 1744. In London, 3 books. A little pretty pocket book, and Tommy Thumb's Songbook, and Tommy Thumb's Pretty Songbook Volume 2. They can't find Volume 1. Interesting to note, even the British Museum, they can't find it. Interesting to note here that both people who produced these books were classic petty bourgeois, people of their time. The one, John Newbery, was a bookseller, and the other, Mary Cooper, woman note, was a printer and publisher of pamphlets. So these weren't weavers who produced this, and they weren't aristocrats, petty bourgeois. The first children's books are then pieces of petty bourgeois production and distribution. With a Pretty Songbook, boys got a ball as a free offer, while girls got a pincushion. So boys play out and girls play in. Tommy Thumb's Pretty Songbook bears the traces of peasant culture with rude rhymes that were soon to be excised and stamped on in the onrush of middle-class shame about pissing, shitting, wanking and fucking. Little Robin Redbreast sitting on a pole, nibbled novel with his head and poop went his hole. It isn't possible even now, many of you probably recognise, that was a joke by the way, I've got one more joke. It isn't possible to put that in the book meant for very young children today. Between this time and now, children's literature has developed into a massive consumer industry involving millions of pounds, millions of people, incorporating a huge range of literate forms from pop-up books, comics, books in the shape of the objects in the book, and so on. However, to understand this industry, we need to take into account the phenomenon of education. Since 1871, the nature of literacy has been affected by how, why and when children have been inducted into society. And children's literature has been affected by it. Now, how long have I got to do that? Oh, schooling has always been a highly segregated affair, bearing a close correspondence to how people view their class traditions. In this way, it's been argued schooling helps reproduce the class system. Capitalism reproduces itself by forcing people to return to the workplace in order to survive and reproduce themselves biologically. However, education, which enables the capitalists to avoid the expense of training workers in basic skills required, provides the ideological justification for the segregation of people into workers of hand or brain, into workers and managers, managers and directors, judges and bosses and so on. It's this justification that children learn at school, i.e. learning what they're entitled to, what their place is, what their lot is the way, and that's the way the state tries to engineer consent with capitalism. Now, the capitalist commodity production of children's literature cannot be separated from this process. Frequently, people try to. Firstly, schools and their libraries were massive buyers of children's books, especially of the originated hardbacks, where smaller print runs enable experiments and risks to be made. Publishing works always on the basis that things, nearly always on the idea that you start out in hardback, and then if the hardback goes, you sell into paperback. Very few books originate in paperback, for rather strange reasons. For many children, usually of working class origin, schools are where the initiation into print actually takes place. And I think there's several consequences of this. School itself has at various times obviously been a major source of subject matter for children's books. Secondly, the buying power of schools has affected what goes into books. So since 1970, the pressure from teachers and librarians for books to represent the lives of non-white and or non-middle class and or female children and adults has changed the face of children's books. It's this change that enrages the Daily Mail and the like. Now in passing here, the whole row about censorship in children's books is hypocritical. In one sense, there's always been censorship in children's literature. adults write it, adults edit it, publish it, distribute it, buy it. Not long after, in the 1740s, that Tom Thumb's pretty book was published, that I quoted earlier, people were publishing books with an intro like this, very significant. Tom Thumb shall now be thrown away, and he that did the giant slay. Those ill-consorted, artless lies, our British youth shall now despise. In other words, the old peasant uncouth culture is not suitable for nice middle-class children. In the 20th century, the Marxist writer Jack Lindsay once submitted a text to be published as a children's book on the Eureka Stockade, which was a miners' strike in Australia, and he was told that it wasn't publishable because it put the officers, who shot at and killed some of the strikers, in a bad light. But the point I'm making here about the pressure from schools is that as a direct consequence of the political and cultural movements of the 70s, children's books changed. Now, the third consequence of schools as buyers is that mass education at 16 brought with it the idea, the notion of the reluctant reader, a euphemism for the working class child. Working class children have to be educated sufficiently to perform the essential tasks of capitalism, but in so doing many become aware, or behave in ways that suggest they're aware, of the extent to which they, their parents and the imagined future they, them as adults, have no say in how education, work and wealth is organised. This is what Marx meant by alienation. So this lies at the bottom of the notion of the reluctant reader, and it's a notion that has spawned literally thousands of simplified books intended to reach that alienated subject, the working class child in school. My son actually, my kids were reading, he's just left school because he couldn't stand it, and they were talking about books now, the kids, and Joe said, "Oh yeah, well the thing about books in school, Dad, is that they're boring even when there aren't." A frightening thought to someone who spent a lot of his time working in schools. But anyway, there you go. In the present context of government control over the curriculum, cuts in libraries and cuts in the library support service that passes on the expertise about children's literature to teachers who are entering a new phase in the school. The combined effect of these measures is that a whole range of books might not see the light of day in the future. I think we're at a critical moment in the history of children's literature. Particularly endangered species are multicultural books that have always relied on sales into libraries and schools, experimental books, and dissident books, all of which relied on small print runs in hardback to get them up and going. And this means, in straight political terms, that the institution of children's literature has become a site of struggle in terms of people's jobs and in terms of government curricula. Now, I want to finish by talking just a little bit about practice. I think I've still got time. I began by showing how childhood is constructed in the public arena. In Marxist terms, children are treated as objects. Things are done to them, they do nothing. Children, of course, in fact, are active agents. They reflect on experience and act in relation to experience. And as an evidence of that, I think there's that wonderful kid's rhyme that goes, I don't swear, I don't smoke, I don't drink. Oh shit, I left my fags in the pub. Reflection on experience. I think that meant to be ironic. It doesn't take much imagination to figure out that working class children get a double dose of oppression. Broadly speaking, there are two ways in which children's literature can address this. One is for writers to represent the lives and or minds of children reflecting and acting on life rather than as passive recipients. As socialists and Marxists, then we might especially look for books that show working class children reflecting and acting on life, and not as part of the old regime where they appear as villains, urchins and idiots. And of course there's a group of writers now doing precisely this, and have been for the last 20 years. Again, there are a bunch of writers now that attack dominant ideas around gender, race and imperialism. In fact, the SWP has a writer in Mr. Gibbons, who does precisely that. The second area of activity is much less developed, and that's in the area of children's own writing. There's always been a channel of pop literary pieces that appear in the children's literature competition. I'm talking here of the kind of work Chris Searle did in the 60s and 70s in such books as Stephanie Word, The World in a Classroom, and Classrooms of Resistance. Still worth looking at, very much so. Mike Simon's books of school students writing with the English Centre, things like Our Lives and book I've forgotten the name of. Alternatively, Brian Simons, and he's no relation, with the story of Zenith, a campaign that was fought to try to save a Turkish girl from being sent back to Turkey. I have a few copies. Now, as adults, we can act as scribes and or providers of technology and paper to ensure that such voices get read and heard. After all, I take as an important, perhaps the vital subtext of the government strategies over literature and language, a line of thinking that is keen to eliminate working class children and school students reflecting on their own lives. If you just put together exactly what all these new requirements are, you'll find that squeezed out is the possibility, certainly after the age of 11, of working class children in particular reflecting on their own lives. And I think that's why the present fight in and around education, in and around children's literature, and in consequence of that, and part of that, in and around notions of childhood, are all so very important. Thanks very much.